Welcome to The Prescription, the Tax Policy Center's biweekly webcast on fiscal policy. This is one of a series of conversations with state, local, and federal government officials, as well as leading economists and other experts. I'm your host, Howard Gleckman, a senior fellow at TPC and editor of our blog, TaxVox. My guest today is Ellen Hughes-Cromwick, senior resident fellow for climate and energy programs at Third Way. Before joining Third Way, she was chief economist of the U.S. Department of Commerce during the Obama administration. Prior to that, she served as chief global economist at the Ford Motor Company. She's a past president of the National Association of Business Economics, where she currently chairs its foundation board of directors. She has her PhD in economics from Clark University, where she now serves on its board of trustees. Before we begin, our usual housekeeping. We encourage audience members to submit questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. The event's being recorded and will be posted online on TPC's website. We're using captioning, which you can adjust or turn off with the live transcript button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you'd like to join the conversation on social media, please use the hashtag #LiveAtUrban. And if you'd like to suggest a future guest for The Prescription, just email us at info@taxpolicycenter.org. Ellen Hughes-Cromwick, welcome to The Prescription.
Hi, Howard. Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. So our topic today is energy taxes, and we're at a fascinating crossroad where the tension between short-term energy needs and the long-term challenges of climate change could not be more stark. Just as one small example, the Biden administration wants to expand a wide range of tax benefits for alternative energy while eliminating tax subsidies for fossil fuels. Yet it's also opening the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and at least considering requests to suspend the federal motor fuels tax. So what do you make of this tension? For example, if Biden wants to increase supply, does it make sense to eliminate production subsidies?
Thank you, Howard. You're absolutely right. There are multiple avenues that need to be pursued as we recognize the importance of moving toward clean energy sources. The IPCC report that was just issued make that case in very stark scientific terms. And I would say to your question, we need all of the above because we recognize that we have transition risk and we also have physical risks associated with this pathway toward net zero emissions. We absolutely have to get on that pathway. And at the present time, in light of geopolitical circumstances, the war in Ukraine and the surge in oil prices, we absolutely have to do all of the above. We have to make sure that we support production. We have tremendous resources here in the US. At the same time, we have to continue on our efforts to support and energize all of the different types of clean energy technologies that are out there and available. And I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about some of that.
So it sounds like one of the challenges is there's always an externality, right? We kind of imagine a path and then something always interferes with that path. And I wonder, are you concerned that we keep kind of getting off track here to resolve these short-term issues and never really make progress in terms of the long term?
Well, I guess we actually have made some progress, Howard. If you look, for example, at the penetration of renewables in terms of our energy production here in the US, we have seen significant progress, and now we're likely to see another leg up in terms of offshore wind. In terms of those two renewable fuels, I think there has been progress. And let's not forget the automotive industry has made significant strides to increase the production of battery electric vehicles. And that will also generate fossil fuel savings over time. Certainly, we want to see the energy that is used to power those batteries in the electric vehicle. We want that energy to be sourced in renewables on our grid. At the same time, just going from an internal combustion engine to an electric vehicle, that technology offers significant gains. And given the reduction in battery cell pricing and costs in the last 5 years, this is now becoming a profitable endeavor for our domestic automotive industry, which, by the way, employs about 4 million people. So it is a crown jewel in the US. It is moving toward cleaner energy in terms of its electrification of these different types of products. And there are other examples where, yes, we have made progress despite this, kind of temporary setback or series of setbacks that we seem to be encountering.
So I want to talk to you about EVs in a few minutes, but it raises again another one of these interesting sort of short-term, long-term conflicts. So at the state level, we're seeing red and blue states alike aggressively moving to suspend gas taxes. But that's going to lower the price and boost demand at a time of limited supply. I mean, does that actually make any sense?
I completely agree with you, Howard. I'm sorry to be discouraging about gas tax holidays, but it is really a short-term measure and it's a very limited fix. Just, basic economics, if you're reducing the price, the quantity demanded will go up. So that'll then reinforce some additional price increases. Let's look at what happened in the state of Maryland. Maryland implemented their holiday of 37 cents a gallon. It was about a 10% drop. That holiday will be enforced from March 18th through April 17th. And since March 18th, gas prices in Maryland are down about 26 cents, according to AAA. And also during the period since the holiday started, oil prices came down by $8.46 a barrel, or that's equivalent to about 20 cents per gallon, but none of that savings was passed through to the consumer. And I think that's why House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has been rather discouraging about a federal gas tax holiday. Federal gas taxes are about 18.4 cents per gallon, but she's indicating that it's really off the table now, that there's a concern again that the holiday amount wouldn't get passed along to consumers. So I don't think it's quite the recipe for or a solution to our challenge. Indeed, Michigan Governor Whitmer just vetoed a gas tax holiday, explaining that it would deplete funds for other important support in terms of state funding for police, for kids, for communities, as well as infrastructure. So I think on net, it sounds like it's a good idea. It looks like it helps, but even in Maryland, with the holiday that's been implemented, for somebody that fills up a tank that's about 15 gallons, they're saving $5.40. Now, I don't want to belittle any savings for somebody who really has to drive for work and needs that vehicle for their kids. But it would certainly be great if it was more than $5.40.
So some states are looking at an alternative, kind of a variation on the theme, which is a rebate. Governor Newsom in California has proposed a $400 per car gas rebate. And interestingly enough, he's also been pursuing a carbon pricing initiative. So it's kind of, West Virginia is also thinking about the same thing. Do you think
yes, and in Connecticut and Georgia have implemented state gas tax holidays with different durations? I do like the idea of that kind of rebate. It seems attractive. Again, it is a temporary measure. Indeed, when journalists interview consumers at the pump, a lot of them are saying, this is nice, it's a temporary kind of thing, but this isn't going to help me for the long run. And we know in terms of economics, a lot of households try to smooth their consumption over several different periods of time, more extended periods of time. So again, is it likely to be kind of the recipe or the solution to the problem? I think the answer is no. I do, however, like if it is a holiday and there are funds that are collected associated with it. I like the idea that it would be earmarked back to low and moderate income, households that do have to get in their car. They may not have access to public transit. A lot of places people don't have the kind of access that metro areas do. And so this is really, the car is kind of the only way they can get to their workplace.
I think that the interesting question in California is, as I understand that proposal, it goes to anybody who has up to 2 cars. So I could have my 2 BMWs and be commuting to my law firm, and I'd still get the subsidy. Does that really make any sense?
And I agree with you. There's some economics of environmental justice issues associated with this. I would not want to see that rebate go to households that frankly can certainly afford $5 a gallon, $6 a gallon, $7 a gallon prices at the pump.
So when you were talking about Maryland, you noted that all of that gas tax reduction was not going to consumers. Presumably some of it is going to producers. And one of the interesting initiatives that Democrats are talking about as a solution to the producer problem is some form of profits tax. There are several different versions. Senator Whitehouse has one, Representative DeFazio has one. How do you think a profits tax could work, and can you impose such a tax without constraining supply?
A bit of history here. The US did have such a tax in the 1980s. And that, of course, as many of our listeners know, followed 2 major oil price shocks in the 1970s. And it was structured in a way to claw back profits, which resulted from roughly half of the increase in oil prices as compared to the period prior to the implementation of the windfall tax. Senator Whitehouse has introduced a bill that's very similar to that. And I think by my calculation, if that sort of tax was implemented, it would generate a substantial amount of revenue. I believe the senator's office has estimated that it could really yield about $45 billion a year, and that could be, basically rebated back to households where, say, joint filers were earning, $150,000 or less, something on that order. So if oil prices were roughly $120 per barrel, that $45 billion in revenue would really represent a sizable rebate amount. Again, I think this is a temporary fix. I'm not quite sure that it would be that helpful. One of the concerns I have is that when we take profits back from companies, energy companies in particular, then they have fewer resources to invest in energy production. And bear in mind, nearly all of these oil companies are dedicating resources to clean energy development. So I worry that this could backfire a little bit and cause some hardship as we make the energy transition. Clearly, taxing excess profits could disincentivize more investment. We need the investment, and we need these companies to be investing in alternative and clean energy solutions. It's true about the term big oil, meaning it's really big. But given some high barriers to entry, the industry operates with a few big players. But that means they have, a little bit more influence over the prices we pay if you include, for example, the cartel and other nationalized oil companies. So our favored preference as economists is certainly competitive industries. We'd like to see more competition. We think that offers better price outcomes for people. but this industry is not in that swim lane. So I'd like to see an energy market operate without a cartel, without big companies, but that's not likely. Instead, I think our best approach is to move aggressively toward a diversity of clean energy sources where competition and innovation will limit ungainly cost price spirals. I mean, I really do think the volatility and the diversity of clean energy sources is going to put us in a whole new ball game, and that we will not be subject to these extreme volatile shocks that oil markets has really confronted us with for so many years.
It's an interesting thing. I was looking at the history just the other day, and going back to the 1970s, it turns out that we have oil price shocks about once every 10 years. So it was almost time to have another one. I don't think anybody could have predicted it was going to happen with a Russian invasion of Ukraine, but we do seem to have these pretty predictably. And it sounds like what you're arguing is that alternative energy sources would be less susceptible to these price shocks.
I think so, Howard. And also, as you said, we've seen enough of these shocks. I mean, we've been through so many of them. And I just, this last one, I think really puts a point on it, that we found ourselves so dependent in a way that made us so much less resilient, that our economies in Europe, frankly, as well, just much less resilient to absorb kind of shocks that we're likely to see in a global economy. So if we now start to invest more aggressively in, hopefully we can talk a little bit about some of the clean energy provisions that were in Build Back Better that could actually survive into a budget reconciliation. But if we follow this path, we know that we can do it. We have great talent and great research and development underway. I think we will be able to turn this corner.
So this is an interesting thing. The argument that you just made is an argument I hear from economists all the time, but I don't hear it from politicians. There are very few politicians out there who are saying this what's happened in Ukraine is actually an opportunity for us. It's a message that was sent that says that we should not be so susceptible to these geopolitical events, and alternative energy could reduce that susceptibility. But instead of saying that, they're saying, let's have gas tax holidays. So why is it that politicians seem unwilling? What's the political economy here? Why are politicians unwilling to make that longer term argument, and instead sort of stuck in the, your price at the pump is going up and I'm going to do something about it mode?
Well, I can't speak to the motivations of particular individuals as they confront this reality, but to be fair to them, this is really hurting a lot of their constituents. And they know that there are many low and moderate income households that are just, really suffering because of these pump price increases. And so from their standpoint, they're looking and searching for some kind of fix to that increase. And so I'm very sensitive, and I sympathize with their passion about trying to find a solution in the short run. I think as economists, we know that, to really change energy markets, it requires investment and it requires an extensive period of time to make any sort of meaningful shift. And we have indeed, as I mentioned earlier, incrementally, we've made some significant progress in terms of increasing clean energy supply and promoting clean technologies. My goodness, even in the infrastructure package that was made into law recently, as you know, there's grants in there for battery development. There is significant resources that are going to be devoted to building out our charging infrastructure here in the US, some efforts to support hydrogen. So I think, to be fair to the politicians, they're working all angles. They are looking carefully at climate policy and clean energy policy, looking to support more demonstration projects for hydrogen, Class 8 hydrogen fuel cell trucks, providing incentives for automotive companies. You know, they are spraying out in all directions, but to be fair to them, this issue in the short run, that they have constituents that are suffering because of pump price increases, I understand where the motivation is there.
So let's talk about some of the initiatives that you mentioned earlier that President Biden has proposed. So one of the big ones is significant tax credits for electric vehicles, and particularly for electric vehicles that are made in the U.S. So I know the Third Way supports those tax credits. Tell me why.
Yes, the automotive industry, as I mentioned, employs about 4 million people when you include the entire supply chain. And we know, as of today, that the economics associated with battery electrified vehicles and the climate clean energy outcomes of those vehicles are going to be extremely competitive and are going to be the dominant technology. I mean, frankly, if you look at China and Europe, they have already begun to expand not only their electrified vehicle production, but sales of battery electric vehicles. The electric vehicle is a much more preferred platform when you think about the possibilities that it opens up. For example, the buy power. It's very easy to take a battery electric vehicle and power a home for a period of time. So there are other attributes to the electric vehicle, all of the digital safety advantages of that vehicle. However, today, the battery is still relatively expensive and not at a competitive level yet with the internal combustion engine vehicle. So what are we going to do? We're going to stand back and not help to support our industry as other markets are moving ahead in subsidizing their industries aggressively. We would lose competitiveness if we stand still. And I think even for just a 5-year period to have an electric vehicle incentive available for, middle income households for a period of 5 years will be enough to make sure that we're generating the demand here in the US and then allowing the automotive companies to fill up the plants because they need to get to scale capacity in order to benefit from that lower per unit cost of production. You can't get to that bottom of the average cost curve if you only make 10,000, 20,000, or 30,000 electric vehicles in a plant. You really have to get up to 200, 300,000 vehicles in a plant, much the way that Tesla has done in their factories. So I think it's that dynamic that with that nudge on the demand side, and as well, we've got different provisions hopefully in budget reconciliation that would support manufacturing grants for making electric vehicles and batteries. All that combined will get us to the point where, then the industry is going to be free and clear. But I think, the concern I really have in this is that, if we don't do that, we will lose our competitiveness, much as we did in other industries in the last 3 decades.
So do you think that EVs will be price competitive without subsidies in 5 years? Is that realistic?
I think it is a realistic possibility. There have been many gains that have been made in terms of the cost structure. I will say one caveat there is that we are seeing significant volatility and increases in key battery materials. And some of this is due to the war on Ukraine because of some vital raw material like nickel from Russia. We also know that cobalt prices have been moving up simply because manufacturers are now moving toward battery electric vehicles. So demand is growing substantially for these critical raw materials. And that's another reason why we need to have support for research and development of new types of new generations of batteries, like solid state batteries, where there are abundant materials that are in the chemistries of those batteries. So I do say, as a caveat, I'm concerned about the material cost going into cells during this period that could possibly alter that 5-year time horizon.
So we haven't really talked about a carbon tax, which is kind of the big enchilada here. And it's always been fascinating to me that it's hard to find an economist who doesn't like a carbon tax. If conservatives, progressives, doesn't matter. Everybody seems to love carbon taxes. But normal humans seem to not like it very much at all. And we've seen this in California, where they debated this and went to carbon pricing, but they could never enact a carbon tax. Canada tried to do it, and there was a lot of pushback. France, there was huge pushback. What has to happen for normal humans to be willing to accept the idea of a carbon pricing regime, or specifically a carbon tax?
Howard, I appreciate the question. I find it also very perplexing. I am not sure what would actually motivate a constituency large enough to promote and to pass carbon taxes. I think one of the, to me, very famous academics, Barry Rabe at the University of Michigan, who wrote a book on this recently, it probably says it best. And I guess I would refer our listeners to that. I am also very perplexed. It would make a lot of sense to have a carbon tax, or to have a price on carbon. You know, maybe it takes more damages from the climate crisis to motivate people. There could be a tipping point. I really don't know. I struggle as much as perhaps you do.
Is there a message that politicians are not delivering? In other words, is there I know you're an economist, you're not a communications person, but is there, this seems to be a messaging problem. People don't really understand carbon taxes, and they in fact equate it to an increase in gas prices at the pump, and they don't want to pay more. You know, there are many proposals out there that include rebates or other ways to get money back into people's hands, but that message doesn't seem to be getting through either. So is this a substantive problem, or is this a messaging problem?
Well, the term tax can be toxic.
Yes, I know.
So toxic for many, because it just sends signals that, you know, I'm working hard, I'm earning my paycheck, and then somebody's going to take a chunk of it away from me for some reason. And so, you know, again, I sympathize with low and moderate income households. When they hear the term tax, they're thinking, oh no, here they're coming, I'm just trying to make ends meet, and now I have to pay another tax. So I do think there's a reaction to the term. And, you know, in many respects, although growing over the last several years, as you know, many more Americans have been confronted with damages associated with climate change, with extreme weather. And so I think many are realizing that we're on the cusp of some change that we need to address more urgently. So if you're living in an area with extreme floods, rainfall, fires, drought, there's more sympathy, I would think, for something like a carbon tax. But, there's still a lot of people that, don't see it, and they may not, feel that there's a need for a tax at this point. Why tax? Or why can't the marketplace just simply address these solutions, to create these solutions without this type of pricing?
Well, we are out of time. Ellen Hughes-Cromwick, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about this. Lots more to talk about. And thank you again for taking the time, and thanks to our audience for joining us.
Thank you very much, Howard.